This is a Fox News alert. The New York Times is reporting that in 2017, the FBI opened an investigation into whether President Trump was secretly a Russian agent. Trace Gallagher is following this report for us tonight. Trace?
Yeah, it just came out, Tucker. The Times is now reporting that in the days President Trump fired James Comey, the days after, as FBI director, law enforcement officials became so concerned about the president's behavior, they began investigating whether he'd been working on behalf of Russia. In other words, whether the president's actions constituted a threat to national security and whether Trump unwittingly had fallen under Moscow's influence. Now, the reasons given, the first was a letter Mr. Trump wanted to send to Mr. Comey about his firing, but never did, in which he mentioned the Russia investigation in the letter. And the second reason being that troubled investigators was an NBC News interview 2 days after Comey's firing, in which Mr. Trump appeared to say he had dismissed Mr. Comey because of the Russian inquiry. The investigation also reportedly looked into the public allegations of whether firing Comey amounted to obstruction of justice. We all know that. The report says FBI agents had grown suspicious of Trump's ties to Russia during that 2016 campaign, but held off opening an investigation because of the sensitivity of the situation. Of course, days later, Special Counsel Robert Mueller took over the inquiry, and now it's apparently part of Mueller's broader assessment. Of course, no evidence has come out publicly that Mr. Trump was secretly in contact or took direction from the Russian government in any way, and there is no word of any sourcing on the story. We should note that Rudy Giuliani has also issued a statement saying, quote, "The fact that it goes back a year and a half and nothing came of it, that showed a breach of national security means they found nothing." And Giuliani said that a short time ago regarding the story. We'll get breaking news as it comes in. More on this from the New York Times. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thanks for that. So if you're keeping track at home, and get a pen and paper, because this is worth remembering, this is why you should never criticize the FBI. You think it's your birthright as an American. You can do it. I wouldn't try it, though. They might open an investigation into you without your knowledge into something appalling. Maybe it's beating your wife. Maybe it's dealing fentanyl to kids. Maybe it's betraying your country in some alliance with Vladimir Putin. You don't need to have done it. But once they investigate you, they can always leak, 2 years later that they were investigating you for this crime that you didn't commit, or at least they found no evidence that you committed. At least they never charged you for it, which is how our system is supposed to work. But it doesn't matter because you're instantly discredited. Don't criticize the FBI. Very unwise. Well, if you live in a major American city like San Francisco or Washington, you may have noticed that things aren't quite as nice as they used to be. There's a lot more trash in the streets. There may be tents on street corners. Those are homeless camps. Some of them are permanent. Petty crime is much more of a threat. This is a big change. It's not an accident. It's by design. There's a new concept on the academic left called survival crimes. These are crimes supposedly committed by the poor in their struggle to survive in this country. And in response to the existence of these survival crimes, the left is now not calling them crimes. They're decriminalizing some of these behaviors entirely. Christopher Rufo is the executive director of the Documentary Foundation, and he joins us tonight. Christopher, thanks very much for coming on. So I'd never heard this phrase before, survival crimes. Have I characterized it correctly, and what are its implications for the rest of us?
You have. Survival crime theory is basically the idea that vulnerable populations, such as the homeless, should be exempt from laws against public camping, public drug consumption, and theft, because, in effect, society has forced them to commit these crimes to ensure their basic survival. And this idea has been percolating in obscure academic journals since the late 1980s. But what's happening now is that it's actually become public policy in major American cities. Here in Seattle, some of the members of the social activist class have now basically created a policy regime in accordance with survival crime theory, and the results have been catastrophic. We now have in King County more than 6,000 people sleeping on the streets, and my contacts in law enforcement tell me there is the explicit and implicit directive to basically let this happen. And at this point, the city of Seattle's property crime rate is 250% higher than Los Angeles, and an eye-popping 400% higher than New York City.
So what this really is a guilt transfer, isn't it? I mean, so it used to be when someone made your life worse, made your neighborhood uglier, stole from you, it was that person's fault. But this new definition transfers the responsibility to you, the law-abiding homeowner, and all of a sudden it's your fault because it's society's fault, so therefore you can't do anything about it, correct?
Yeah, this is, I think, what the biggest danger for this kind of social justice policing is that slowly in cities like Seattle, we're creating parallel justice systems. There's one kind of traditional justice system for tax-paying middle-class citizens and a totally separate system for politically favored identity groups. And I think that this is really has the potential to undermine the core principle of equal protection under the law.
I mean, at a certain point, are people going to start to say, you know, I don't want to live around people who victimize ordinary Americans, the homeless encampment, and I don't want to live around the politicians who make the homeless encampment possible? Aren't normal people going to leave? I mean, I wouldn't live near that on a dare, would you?
Yeah, you know, I mean, Seattle is a great city, but there is this growing frustration with this problem where everywhere you go, there are homeless encampments. Even in my neighborhood, within a block of a public elementary school, there's been a homeless encampment with up to 50 people that are doing drugs, committing crimes, and causing chaos, a block away from a public elementary school since last summer. And there's been no response from the city government, despite hundreds of complaints over months and months and months. And I think we're reaching a point where normal, everyday, tax-paying citizens are fed up, and this kind of government by ideology that's totally blind to the impact that it's having on real citizens is hopefully going to start to face some consequences as we move forward with the municipal elections later this year.
Yeah, I don't even think it's blind. I mean, this is an act of aggression. When people treat you this way, what they're saying is, we hate you. We hate you. I mean, I don't know the other message. Christopher, thank you. That was so interesting and sad at the same time, but good to know. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.